coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Kate.
And I'm Laura. And this week we're continuing our coverage of Lorelai with an episode solely devoted to all the times that she was a huge hypocrite. Jason Stiles calls her out on it in season 4, and he ain't wrong. So we're going to discuss as many examples as we can in the time that we have. We always show our work.
Yes, we do. But before we proceed with this is your blanket spoiler warning. If you do not want to know what happens, now's a good time to bow out, go binge the show, and come back. Because we're not responsible for what we say from here on out. And if you could do all the YouTube-y things, like this video, subscribe, drop us a comment, share this with your friends who are also big Gigi fans. It really helps us out. And we are always so grateful for all of the interaction and the support that we receive from you. So without further ado, I referred to Lorelai in our Jess episode as the Queen of Hypocrisy. And so now here we are. I preface this by saying that I love Lorelai. Okay. I think she has many great moments and qualities, but when we were trying to figure out how to approach the character deep dives for the main character of a 7-season series plus a 4-part revival, we felt we needed to get a little creative and come at Lorelai from an angle that is acknowledged but not often really explored or examined so closely. And when I was watching A Family Matter and I heard Jason say Lorelai Gilmore is a hypocrite, I just thought that would make such a great title and concept for a video. So yeah, some of the other character deep dives have been a lot easier to sort of wrap our brains around, but Lorelai is everywhere. And so I was like, I want to dig into her worst impulses more fulsomely. And I feel like this is a really cool lens to do it. So let's talk about hypocrisy a little bit. In general, the easiest definition I can give is, it comes from the dictionary. I can't remember whether this was Merriam-Webster, but Google it, and this is one of the dictionary definitions that comes up. The practice of claiming to have moral standards or beliefs to which one's own behavior does not conform. Advocating behaviors you don't practice. Failure to follow your own expressed rules, morals, principles, etc. Originally comes from the Greek, classic. Hypocrisis, which means jealousy, play acting, acting out, dissembling. And the word hypocrite also comes from the Greek, hypocrite, which means judgment. And we often do judge hypocrites. So yeah, critics. People who are critics. Hypocrites are people who like to judge others for their moral transgressions without reflecting on their own. Sometimes they're even the same ones. So I feel like that's maybe a good place to start. Yeah.
Is Lorelai's middle name Victoria or is it Hypocrite? I feel like I get that mixed up sometimes.
Yeah. When she's walking across the stage at her graduation, Lorelai Hypocritical Gilmore.
I mean, maybe we should have, because we see so many instances of it. We're going to try and cover as many of them as we can. I'm sure there are going to be ones that we miss. So if you catch any or know of any that we don't touch on, obviously, again, just drop us a comment and let us know. But, and it's going to be about Lorelai. But again, I just feel like it's worth mentioning that she probably gets a lot of this behavior from Emily, because Emily Gilmore is also a massive hypocrite on this show. Will be the last person to ever admit it. But it's, I think, a behavioral trait that we see when it probably shouldn't be, because I think it's more of a personality trait in my mind for someone to be that way. But for whatever reason, it got passed on to Emily, from Emily to Lorelai. I think it definitely gets passed on from Lorelai to Rory. If we ever get Revival 2.0, I hope that baby girl does a little bit better in life. We'll have to see. But there are a lot of instances of it, and Lorelai never really even owns up to any of them either. She's very much a Rory in that regard also, where she's just, I'm holier than thou. Don't call me out on my stuff because I'm not the hypocrite, you are. it's not me, it's you. Which in itself is a hypocritical action. So, like, we have a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do. Let's start with this. Why do you think people are hypocrites? Where does this come from?
I think it's because people know that they're not perfect, and no one rightly is or ever is. But I feel like it's so much easier to cast judgment and blame and point out someone else's flaws and misgivings than it is to ever confront your own and to do, work on yourself to better when you do fall short in that regard. I think it's very easy for anyone to point fingers at somebody else and say, I can't believe that they have done that, or they're acting in this way. But when the tables are turned and those fingers are pointed at you and someone is saying, well, you've kind of done the same things, or this is a moment when you were not perfect, no one wants to have that judgment or that stone cast upon them, so to say. It's just so much easier to always lay blame on others than to just confront that you're not a perfect person either. And I think that's a large part of it. It's just no one wants to go to bed at night with that sort of guilt, when it's just easier to go to sleep thinking that, like, I'm a better person than, my next door neighbor. And I will sleep better feeding myself that sort of, I don't know, just sort of encouragement or, misgivings about myself. I just think it's because we don't want to admit that we're flawed, and it's so much easier to point out the flaws in another person than to recognize what we have going on within our own lives.
Yeah, definitely something I notice about the holier than thou Gilmores is that sense of self-righteousness. And I think a lot of it does come out of that, not just for them, but anytime. We always think that we're maybe better than we are because we claim to have knowledge about ourselves that other people don't have. We can point out other people who are not acting in a moral fashion or who are not acting in accord with how they say they feel or who they say they are, because it's a lot easier for us to recognize that in others than in ourselves. And I think kind of like the bottom line is that it's easier to look good than it is to be good. Mm-hmm. Hitting that state of human perfection is untenable. And so even in the moments when you are good, you can't always be good or always have perfect knowledge. And that leads to us faltering. But we know that we have good intentions. And so we come up with these post hoc justifications for our own actions that make us feel better about that so that we don't have to totally contend with our own fallibility. Yeah, it's an ego defense. And we all partake in it. I am sure that like literally every adult alive has been a hypocrite at some moment or another. And I think that they're sort of like, once again, hypocrisy exists on a spectrum. They're sort of like the small things that are pretty, inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, where it's just like when you, for example, tell someone like you should eat more salads and you should take a supplement, when half the time I forget to take my own supplements, where it's just like touting health promoting behaviors while being a smoker or whatever, like stuff like that, all the way up to politicians or judges who are, imposing laws and standards of behaviors onto other people while actively breaking those laws, and participating in abhorrent behaviors that they have publicly denounced. So, Lorelai Gilmore, not super terrible in the grand scheme of things, but we're going to kind of dig into all the little ways she deceives herself about her own righteousness. And I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah. And it's definitely about how, not only how you see yourself, but I think it's just predominantly about how the world views you. Everyone wants to be seen in a very good light. and no one wants to have bad things said about them or be viewed in a negative sort of way. So they'll even lie or be deceitful about things that they're being hypocritical about because they don't want that judgment or that negative light cast upon them. But then we'll be the first to, call out our neighbor on it. It's almost sort of very biblical in a sense, where it's like, well, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, but we're all throwing stones at each other all the time. So stop it.
I bruise like a Georgia peach. Please stop throwing stones at me. Yeah, no, that actually brings up something I had in my notes as well. Just thinking about how hypocrisy is heavily condemned in the Bible sort of brought me across an article, a listicle, if you will, from a blog called Becoming Christians. And it was just delightful. Yeah, hypocrites take the pain and effort to look sanctimonious and sinless. They want people to believe they're more righteous than others. And it's about that outward appearance, like praying publicly, but not obeying other commands of God, partaking in man-made tradition instead of upholding the commandments of God, praising or seeking the praise of other men over the relationship with God is also not good. And they, what was the quote in here? Hypocrisy is among the greatest sins of Christians all throughout the ages. It has led many astray. Due to hypocrisy, many unbelievers are turned off to Christianity, thinking that we are no different to others. And so I was just like, hypocrisy is among the greatest sins of Christians? What about like murder and adultery? All those other deadly sins that you talk about. And it's just, I don't know. It feels thrown out of proportion to say that it is one of the greatest sins. Maybe in terms of the sheer like commonality of it, the fact that everyone does it, and that for a religion as dogmatic as Christianity, it's like we have all of these commandments and these ideas and ideals that need to be lived up to, and not doing that is sin. And so just this idea of guilt and never measuring up to the standard keeps people in line. And they're not necessarily wrong about the second part of this, unbelievers turned off thinking that we're no different to the others. I'm just going to point out all of the scandals that the church has had in terms of preaching one thing and then abusing the members of their congregations.
It is, because aside from it, being a no-no, within Christianity and within, I think, probably most religions, there's even a passage that says, and I'm not going to quote this directly or perfectly, I don't think, but it's like, essentially, it's like, why don't you remove the plank from your own eye before you try to start removing the speck from a brother's eye? As if to say, like, you're so egregiously hypocritical that you've got just a full plank of wood going through your head that you need to take care of first, when maybe your neighbor or your brother, sister in whatever religion has like a small speck of dust, and so you're focused in on that as opposed to what you have going on. Stop it, take care of your own ish, and then maybe try and compassionately assist the other person with their whatever they have going on, but stop being such a hypocrite when you have such bigger problems than that other person. It's just very clear cut. Like, it's a huge no, don't do it.
Yeah. The blind leading the blind, literally. And also, please put on your own oxygen mask before assisting those around you. Just, yeah. And just another funny quote from this that made me connect it back to Gilmore as well. Jesus went on to say that these hypocrites are blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. The hypocrites will warn others of every small violation of the law, but will not bother correcting them or themselves when it comes to sins with bigger consequences. And that makes me remember that time Kirk was Jesus, the second time Kirk was Jesus. And they are missing half the table for the Last Supper, and Kirk's like, or sorry, Taylor's like, okay, start packing it up, people. And Kirk's like, you would fold simply due to hardship. Would you follow blind guides which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel? Oh, that's your blood sugar talking, sweetie. Eat a candy bar. This is but a crisis of faith. And I just find it so interesting that, you know, that line refers to hypocrisy. You know, the idea that like you work so hard on these like little things, you focus on the small, and the large things go unacknowledged or undealt with, right? And I think that's a very valid point, where it's like it's super easy to be very nitpicky of other people, and let the bigger things go. And we'll get to that when we talk a little bit more about Lorelai and Rory. But yeah, I found I love that they referenced that. I was like, I have heard that somewhere before. Where is that from? Festival of Living Art. That's where.
Amy and Dan did their religious homework that week. I'll just say that.
Ironically, because Amy refers to herself as Jewish-ish. I mean, granted, Old Testament, New Testament, some overlap, some of that stuff. But yeah, I found that funny. But yeah, and so especially here in the West, Christianity is sort of the dominant moral framework that a lot of people are working with. And so when the Bible says something is wrong, we latch onto that. And I think there's also this sort of just like really human element of loving pointing out when other people are wrong or bad, and like catching people in the act. I think we've been seeing this a lot lately in the discourse around plagiarism, you know, like all of those exposés that have come out recently, and just the idea where it's just like, I'm so much better than you because I'm better at citing my sources. And you know, any slight slip up is treated as if it's a massive like transgression against the academic community or the video essayist community, where, you know, someone makes a call or uses a turn of phrase that they read somewhere and didn't properly cite it. And it's just like, you're a plagiarist, and you're everything that's wrong with academia, and you're everything that's wrong with the internet, and you're a terrible person. And, you know, it's definitely an easy way to feel superior. Like, oh, I would never do that. When, you know, we all learn things from places and like pick up turns of phrase, and it's like, ideas aren't copyrighted. And so it can be hard if you're not working with copyrighted work to be like, where did that come from? Where did I learn that? Where did I pick up this turn of phrase to even like recognize yourself when you're doing it? And so I just, you know, I've obviously been kind of keeping an eye on the whole H. Bomber guy, James Somerton, Illuminati thing the last couple of months. And it's sort of like snowballing and taking on a life of its own, where like now we're just so intent to root out the plagiarists. We're like, it's like a witch hunt now, because there's something satisfying to us just innately as people, to feel morally superior to people who are not living up to community standards.
Yeah. And I feel like the plagiarism is definitely a very, very excellent example, but I feel like it's also the crux of just a large portion of reality television. And that's what draws in viewers. It's always about just people who are casting blame and pointing out the drama and the poor decision making of other individuals, while their behavior is probably equal to or even more abhorrent than those who they're, pointing those fingers at. And that's how I think a lot of dating shows, predominantly within the reality universe, but that's just how reality television draws in viewers and gets people to come back, because it's just people behaving badly, pointing fingers at other people behaving badly, and it just turns into a cesspool of bad behavior and hypocrisy. But we as a society these days, we're just living for it.
We eat that shit up. I don't know what it is. Yeah, that's something we should look at ourselves.
I think it's just because it makes us feel better at the end of the day, but that's also really problematic.
Yeah. Again, need to look at that in ourselves and figure out why that's so satisfying to us. But yeah, I guess moving along to the more specific examples of stuff. As you said, it all kind of starts with Emily, I think. And I'm having a hard time with this because I'm trying to think of times when she's internally inconsistent, where she says something and acts in an opposite manner. There's only a couple instances I can truly think of, and it makes me wonder whether she's truly, like, whether she's a hypocrite herself most of the time, or whether it's more of just her controlling and abusive dynamic that mimics hypocrisy, because I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in narcissism, and she obviously has some narcissistic traits that we've picked up on, and so I'm wondering, it's like a cart before the horse, which came first, chicken or the egg, the narcissism or the hypocrisy. And so, there's definitely a couple that we'll highlight here, but obviously Emily is very hypercritical of Lorelai's small flaws, at least according to Emily's worldview. There's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of dismissal, there's a lot of blame, and obviously that has quite an impact on Lorelai. And Lorelai's left feeling self-conscious, inferior, like she's always going to be judged and humiliated by her mother. And hypocrites are definitely kind of the first to turn it back on you, like I think that's a big component of it, is like, don't look at me, look at you, like look at what you've done.
Yeah, and I think Emily overarching, like one of the things that she does is she constantly butts into everybody else's life, but God forbid you butt into hers. Like, it'll very much be a mind your business, Lorelai. That's not your concern. That's not your place. Like, don't talk about me or my life. Don't comment on my marriage. What's going on with me? What's going on with Richard? What's going on with anything else? But then she'll give full-blown commentary on Lorelai's life, how she's failing, how she's not being a good mother to Rory. She'll butt in on Suki's wedding and start making these plans that are just not in line with what she wants. So that to me is just the crux of where I see it from Emily, where it's like, you can make yourself a part of everybody else's life and overstep the line every single time and be dismissive of everyone else's boundaries. But the second that someone even puts like a toenail over yours, you're just instantly like just flagellating them for it.
Yeah, she goes right to attack mode. That's for sure. And this is something that we see in Lorelai as well, is Lorelai also has a tendency to butt into other people's lives. Not just her mom or even Rory's. But I think, again, she justifies it to herself by assuming that her intentions are pure and that somehow makes it okay, or at least better than what Emily does. Objectively, I think she handles things better than Emily, simply because Emily's worldviews on what is appropriate is so narrow and often downright toxic. And it causes her to come in with judgment rather than insight or assistance. But that doesn't mean it's okay for Lorelai to constantly interfere in other people's relationships and offer up her unsolicited opinions all the time. It's still participating in that same behavior that irritates her when her mom does it, while making excuses for herself and creating a double standard because you think your intentions are good. And we see this when she butts in with Luke and Rachel, and like I have the quote here. So if Rachel turns out to be an evil fembot and murders Luke in his sleep, I'm not responsible, am I? Only in an intergalactic court. Rory even says to her, like, you butted in for all the right reasons. You were concerned about a friend. And I think that in some cases there are circumstances where it's okay to butt in if a friend truly is doing something dangerous. But I don't think that's what was happening with Luke and Rachel. That was more just like Lorelai entering that dynamic and being triangulated within it in a kind of troubling way. And then another place where I see that happen is oh man, what was it? I had it and then I lost it. I mean, she occasionally gives her opinions on Suki and Jackson. I don't know. What I don't know why I can't remember this. Help me. When are some other times that she like butts into people's lives without them asking?
I mean, I feel like she's very hypocritical of Lorelai's men and Rory's men. No,
I mean Lorelai. Like when Lorelai does this.
Oh, when Lorelai butts into people's lives?
Yes.
Okay. Again with Jess. I would say first off,
Jess. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yes.
Okay. Would you like to go off? Because I know.
No, you go off because I just talked. But that was the one I was thinking was Nick and Nora.
Yeah, so she's obviously very much in the camp of like not loving Jess as a partner for Rory. Obviously there have been some poor choices with, getting into a car accident, perhaps some reckless driving, not thinking that he's a good enough partner for Rory. But who are you to decide? Because at the end of the day, it's Rory's choice of who she wants to be with. Now, if something really detrimental, like DV is coming to the forefront, or even something that's worse than that, and Jess is a not okay partner in that regard, obviously I want to not upset anybody here. That's a very heavy subject matter. Then yeah, Lorelai, you have every right to step in, and you should, because now your daughter's safety is a legitimate concern here. But just because you don't necessarily like Jess's behavior a lot of the time, or he's not as scholarly or as academically inclined for success as Rory is, and you're going to hold her back from getting to the IVs that I want for her. This has been like the goal that I've installed in her since she was 2, and now you're just going to be disruptive of that, and you don't treat her as well as you should. And Dean was a better boyfriend. First off, don't start comparing your teenage daughter's boyfriends either. Just no. But she's not seeing Jess for the person that he is a lot of the time, as much as she's just seeing him as, a plague that must be eviscerated from my daughter Rory's life, like as quickly as possible. Just wipe him off of the face of the earth, because he's just going to be disruptive to her and potentially having her make a mistake and become a teenage parent, as I was. She's flashing back to her own childhood in a lot of ways as well, and just thinking that this boy could be what derails Rory's life, and it would solely be his fault and not any of Rory's making. And so she's instantly placing a lot of blame on Jess too, for things that he hasn't even done yet or will never do. So it's just also very hypocritical for her to judge her daughter's partners unnecessarily when they really haven't done anything to warrant that judgment, when that's all Emily ever did to you, and look how much you hated it. You could never stand it, and that's why you acted out in the way that you did. Thank goodness that you have a daughter who didn't behave like you did when Emily was doing that to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the example that I had in mind. I was more thinking of when she tries to talk to Jess on his first couple days there, and they have him over for dinner, and she tries to butt in as a sort of adult parental wisdom figure for him and be like, look, I know where you've been. And then, she hates it when people interfere in her relationships, but then she tries to insert herself in Luke's relationship to his troubled nephew. And then she is taken aback by the blowback from that. So that was kind of the thing that came to mind because of the butting in part. But the point about her inserting herself into Rory's relationships is not wrong in the slightest. We'll talk more about her with Rory as well. But it happened with Logan too. She was very judgmental of Logan, even though she essentially was Logan. Logan is just what she would have been if she didn't get pregnant, a kid who has a lot of expectation and legacy and is dicking around as a way to forestall adult responsibility because he can. And I think, given the choice, Lorelai would have done the same thing, and she might have enjoyed her privilege a little bit longer if she didn't have somebody else's well-being and identity now on the line along with hers. She may have gone off to an Ivy or at least another good school, little Ivy maybe. I think they were talking about like Vassar for her or something. And, maybe taking up more of the privileged lifestyle that places like that can afford. Just that sort of like, it was reinforced for Rory at Yale, and it might have been similar for Lorelai had she actually gone to college somewhere like that. I think she might have turned out very differently if she hadn't run away to a humble small town kind of thing. And so she does like to kind of come in with judgment and be like, I am morally superior to you because I decided to give up my wealth. Because people who are wealthy are vain and vapid and immoral. And so the moments that she does lean into that privilege, I'm just like, it's me. Hi. And the problem, it's me. So, yeah.
And she does it directly with Logan, when they're having that conversation in the kitchen. And she's like, you just messed up. You probably lost $1 million. Do you not realize the mistake that you've just made? I didn't raise Rory in that way. I love how she's like, you were spoon-fed privilege. And it's like, well, so were you, Lorelai. So were you. So don't come down on Logan.
Made a mistake.
Like, you've made mistakes too. Logan made one. He's owning up to it right now. And if anything, he's trying to say, like, listen, I don't want this mistake to be how Rory views me, because I know it's a really bad one and it's very costly from so many different angles right now. But I didn't want to talk about it in front of her because I'm just trying to put myself in like a good light for her. And for Lorelai to come back and just say again, like, well, you were spoon-fed privilege. Again, so were you. And then for her to say, like, it was Spork City up in here. It's like, but that was your choice on how to raise her. And it has no bearing on how Logan's parents chose to raise him or the result of what his upbringing was like. You're casting stones here right now, so many, and it's just not okay. And I commend Logan in that moment because he was he owned up to his mistakes, and he was just politely begging the mother of his girlfriend at the time to be like, can we try and be a little bit cool about this?
Yeah. He needed some time to process it. And I think, it probably took her time to process the fact that she was going to be a mother, and she had a couple of months to wrap her head around it and to make a plan. And even a couple months after Rory was born to figure out what that life was like and realize that her situation was no longer tenable. And at least Logan's mistake was kind of only money. Lorelai's was her entire life and now the entire life of a new person. And, obviously not to say that Rory's existence is a mistake, as, Straub and Francine might like to imply. And, Lorelai doesn't even really regret it, but I think it's a mistake just in a this is not an ideal situation kind of thing, where it's like, it would have been better if Lorelai had been able to mature without that kind of stress and strife, and to form her own identity a little bit more solidly before bringing a dependent into the situation. I think, nobody wants that situation for themselves. And so it's a mistake in that sense where it's like, would have been nicer if she had been more ready for parenthood. But going back to Emily, because there's still a few more points on her I'd like to make before we move on to the rest of Lorelai's hypocrisy with Rory and then other people. The one definite place of hypocrisy that I can see with her is with Trix, and the way that she interacts with Richard's mom and how that sort of mirrors the way she interacts with her own daughter. And like the key one for me is the hat rack. Mm-hmm. I need the hat rack. The fish flies at night. Yeah. And when she regifts that hat rack to Lorelai, when just a few episodes earlier she was over there and she's like, where are those Baccarat candlesticks I gave you? And she finds out about the leering pornographic monkey lamp and is like, this isn't just about regifting. This goes to the very heart of taste. But then we find out that she gifted kind of a heinous hat rack, it was covered in like cherubs or weasels or whatever, or dragons or whatever it was that was on there. And it's just like pot, kettle, black,
something
kind of situation. And then she kind of turns around and flips out on Trix in Face Off, like, I saw her kissing a man in a tracksuit. And, she kind of has to learn from Lorelai a little bit, like how to deal with Gran and how to deal with her constant judgments. And yeah, it's just the whole like circle fustercluck of bad communication and bad relationships that are not good, shall we say, where boundaries are not maintained and communication is not had, and behavior is hypocritical.
Yeah, and Trix was Trix. So I feel like whether it was Emily or any other person that, Richard had married, that poor woman was just going to be given the runaround no matter who she was at the end of the day. It certainly did not make things easier for Emily, but she had no mechanisms in place to adequately cope with what Trix was throwing at her. She just kind of swept it under the rug and just didn't acknowledge any of these issues. But then when she does the same thing to Lorelai, it's just, don't even think about sweeping it under the rug. We need to address this. So she can confront others, but she can't deal with any sort of confrontation herself.
Yeah. And another thing that comes to mind with Emily is Kill Me Now, and how, in that episode we see Lorelai for the first time really contending with the fact that Rory is her own person. And Lorelai never got that from her own parents, and obviously she really wanted to foster that for Rory to let her spread her wings in whatever way she wanted to. But she just sort of assumed that Rory would want the life that she had, which is exactly what Emily did to her. Emily assumed that Lorelai should have the prim, proper life where she marries the right guy and gets a proper nickname like Bunny, when that's not what she wanted. And so Lorelai assumed that Rory would be running away from all the things that she ran away from. And she has this like mini existential crisis about it. And kind of tries to control the situation that Emily seems to be manipulating. So there's this tug of war between them that night at dinner when Lorelai's like, don't make her do this. You're trying to manipulate the situation in such a way that there's no way out. And then Emily flips it back on her and is just like, you're afraid that she's going to go and she's going to like it and I'll be right. And Lorelai is like, no, I just know what she likes and I know that she's going to be miserable. And Emily's like, that sounds a little controlling to me. Yep, walked right into that one, didn't I? She's so sure that her dislike of her parents and her distaste for their lifestyle will translate to everyone else. And then, you know, she even talks about it with Suki, and it's like, it's about the fact that, like, she had fun with my dad, and, like, I want her to have a good relationship with her grandparents. Just because I don't doesn't mean she shouldn't, right? But then she's constantly undermining them and shit talking them to her, and trying to get them out of Friday night dinners, trying to get around the rules, trying to, again, manipulate situations in her own favor. And it's kind of the same thing with Chris, where she sort of, like, impacts Rory's perceptions of things and indirectly tries to control the situation via avoidance.
Yeah, she's very much about making Rory's life what she wants it to be. And not just with Emily, but with Christopher, and how much access he's going to have to Rory. How much access she wants Emily and Richard having to Rory. How much access she wants even Rory's chosen partners and boyfriends to have to her. And at the end of the day, you know, yes, you're her mother. At some instances, like, you know, she is still a minor child. You still do have that responsibility and some sort of say, but you need to let her make her own choices. And if she wants to interact with her grandparents and go to the club, fine. If she's choosing to date this particular young man and there's really nothing that's disastrously wrong, fine. You need to let her have the associations that she's going to have, and not put a clamp on what those relationships are going to look like just because it's not what you want for her.
Yeah, that's exactly what Emily did to her. She's like, we're going to break up her and Luke, and we're going to try to get her together with Christopher. And, you know, Lorelai didn't take as direct a role. In fact, I admire Lorelai's restraint a lot of the time in not giving every opinion she had about Rory's guys. But I think she definitely telegraphed her true feelings and tried to sort of, like, get Rory to ask the questions that would get on her side mm-hmm. Of some of these boyfriends. And she definitely had some influence behind the scenes without Rory knowing sometimes, especially with Dean, in, you know, giving him certain pieces of advice. And I think most of them were good, but just in general, she had a lot of influence indirectly. Emily tried to, like, burst in and take control and make Lorelai's life look like what she thought it should look like, whereas Lorelai took a gentler approach. And it doesn't mean that she wasn't butting in. I don't know. It's hard to say exactly what level of that is appropriate, especially when your daughter's a minor. But moving on a little bit, do you think it was hypocritical for Lorelai to burst into her mom's house in Hammers and Veils to rip on her mom for not caring about her engagement to Max when Lorelai was constantly hiding things from them?
Yep. Disclosure is Lorelai's right, and I can understand why she is reticent to reveal a new partnership when, again, her parents have been so set on, we always wanted it to be Christopher for you. We always wanted you to have that, like, nuclear family unit as, like, the biological parents to Rory. You know, even dating a school teacher who is, you know, an instructor at the institution that Rory is now attending, I feel like she could definitely see how Emily and Richard would come down on her for that as just inappropriate. We've talked about whether it is or it isn't. That's not the focus of the conversation here. But I think it's not wholly, but definitely a little bit hypocritical to expect this knowledge to come to the forefront for your parents when they've had no time to process it or what is going on within their own daughter's life, but expect them to elicit a largely 100% across the board positive response to that news, having no foundation for the relationship even existing. Now, it's a gray area because, again, you would think, like, as Lorelai's parents, yes, you should be happy for your daughter that she has entered into, you know, this relationship now and is, you know, pursuing marriage with this person. But I would still hold her to account here, like, for that expectation of that, like, just like expecting joy and that response from her parents when you didn't tell them anything. So yeah, I would say that was a little bit of a hypocritical moment there.
Yeah, I mean, the types of behavior at play here are not like a one-to-one correlation, but I think it's sort of like it's almost hypocritical in the sense that she expects a certain response from them when she's not always forthcoming with them. Like, she expects positive reactions when she herself is hiding, obfuscating, all of these things. She's just sort of like expecting that, like again, with this sort of like double standard where it's like, my behavior doesn't really matter. All that matters is your reaction to what's happening in my life. And so it's, yeah, you're right. It's gray area because it's just, you know, Lorelai is kind of playing by her own rules here. She's trying to set the terms and trying to call other people out for their behavior when she herself has not behaved the best. You know, she wants a good relationship with her parents on this front. Like, she wants their approval and their whatever out of this. Like, you know, it's like, oh, I'm finally being an adult and finally getting married. Why aren't you happy for me? When she is not involving them in this life whatsoever. So there's that. But yeah, I think it's hard to say with Emily because, like I said, there's not a lot of behavior where it's like she's saying one thing and doing another. Like I said, few instances of it. Everyone's got a little bit of something going on, but I think it's more that Lorelai is trying to, like, she grew up with someone who was so controlling that she needed to psychologically distance herself from that. And so, again, she grew up with it. And so some of that was passed on and ingrained in her. And so, again, as a distancing mechanism, she has to, like, shut down all thoughts of that. And therefore, she's unable to see what's happening when she does it herself. And so, yeah, it's definitely important to kind of like start with the influence of Emily and then work our way down through her other relationships, which brings us to a more fulsome discussion of Rory and what she does with Rory. And, you know, one of the first instances we get of, I don't even know if this is hypocrisy or not, but in Deer Hunters, when Rory kind of flips out and ends up in the principal's office or the headmaster's office, and Lorelai comes in to defend her, like, she thinks she knows Rory so well, and she's surprised when her daughter doesn't behave as she expects. She says, Rory doesn't throw fits. She's the most even-tempered person I know. And then Charleston throws it back and is like, well, then she did a lovely impression of you. And so there's, again, like, expectation is not met. I'm behaving exactly the way that she did, but saying that, you know, she's not like that. And it's not quite hypocrisy, but it's just like an interesting, or maybe it's Rory being hypocritical of them. I don't know. I don't think she's not claiming, I don't think she's not claiming that what she did was wrong. I think she recognizes that one in that moment, but like, it's just, once again, Lorelai's twisted perception of her own daughter that causes her to defend her when she is like that herself, and also she doesn't know her daughter as well as she thinks she does.
Yeah, I don't think it was so much hypocrisy so much as Lorelai not recognizing that, like, your daughter had a very stressful moment and encounter, you know, with this deer and with this car incident that led her to, you know, not being able to take a test that she had prepared for, which led to, you know, this meltdown in Charleston's office. I just don't think that she knew or expected or foresaw that coming from Rory, because she's so even keeled. She doesn't get emotionally bent like that when things don't go her way. I might, and I can own up to that. Obviously, you saw that from me not too long ago, but that's not Rory. And I think it wasn't hypocrisy so much just as Lorelai not knowing her own daughter in that moment and not recognizing that she can have stressful situations that will lead her to kind of snap a little bit in those moments. And it's just a normal human response, but not one that I think Lorelai would have expected from her own daughter.
Yeah, it's almost like she expects Rory to be better than her. But the behavior that's modeled for Rory is Lorelai's behavior. So, I don't know. It's an interesting one. But I think one, and we alluded to this last week, so we're picking up this thread again. One that definitely feels a little more hypocritical to me is in the third Lorelai, when Trix offers the trust fund to give it to Rory early so that they can pay for Chilton, so that Lorelai doesn't have to borrow money from her parents to finance this. And I feel like so much of Lorelai's identity comes out of her financial beliefs about the seeming moral superiority of the financially self-sufficient woman who is not supported by other people. And obviously this trust fund would make it so that Rory, a minor, could be self-supporting, at least for a time. And so this is something that Lorelai willingly gave up out of a principled stance against wealth. She clearly doesn't like wealthy people and thinks that they are morally inferior. It's very clear throughout the series just how often she says things against rich people. And yet, and she's so into this financial independence and self-sufficiency, and she tries to teach this to Rory, and yet she's going to let her have a trust fund. I mean, obviously she has second thoughts, but it's not so much about the principle of the thing as it is, oh no, what if Rory gets this money and wants to leave me in the dust? She we talked about this last week. Once again, Lorelai only thinks of Lorelai. And it's her way or the highway. And so it's not explored from the position of like, I don't want Rory to turn into a spoiled trust fund kid. Like, why is it okay for her good kid to get a crap ton of money, but other trust fund babies are selfish and entitled? Like, why is it okay to accept a large sum of money like that for Rory when she won't even let Emily buy her like a Montblanc pen for a couple $100? And Emily also offers to buy her cars so she doesn't have to take the bus to school, which would actually, like, I mean, as much as cars are not a great investment, it would be a pretty good investment for Rory, so that, it saves her time, and it should theoretically last her years into college, and, for her mobility and all of that. Like, it wouldn't have been the most egregious gift. And, Lorelai didn't want Rory to be spoiled in that way and to just like get something handed to her. But it was fine when she graduated Chilton. Like, 1 minute it's not okay for them to buy her a car, but suddenly she achieves this other thing, and it's like, okay, now it's okay for you to receive a gift like this, and so she earned the car, but she's not earning the trust fund. And it's like, her stances on these things are inconsistent, and I think that's where the hypocrisy comes in. And it's like, I don't know that Lorelai got a trust fund, and even if it had been offered to her, if she wasn't disowned, that she would have taken it. But for some reason, it's okay for Rory to have it.
Yeah,
for Rory to get that advantage and that leg up in life, but not her to accept it. I don't know. Or not other people to accept it.
I don't have a good explanation, but that's why it's hypocritical, because I don't have a good explanation for it. I can't rationalize why taking even a smaller sum of money for a car is not okay, but you can accept $250,000 to bankroll for your daughter's life, and no harm, no foul. Like, she just deserves it. But again, going back to what you said, if another Chilton student, gets that same amount of money, I'm sure Lorelai would just be like, oh, well, look at that. Like, just spoon feeding your kids privilege again, just bankrolling your futures. It's like, but you just allowed Trix to do the same thing for your own kid. Again, I have no explanation, but that's why it's hypocritical, because I can't justify it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, she earned a car by being valedictorian. Don't love that. The idea that you deserve freedom and mobility, like that's an appropriate like reward, like that you have to earn that, where most kids get, like, you can just get your driver's license and you can borrow your parents' car, and like freedom and mobility come with independence, you know what I mean? And so the idea that it's a present that you earn based on your academic attainment and your accolades, is exactly how we get snotty elite institutions that foster horrible competitive kids and a hyper-capitalist society that hoards wealth and doesn't take care of its people. So
louder for the people in the back.
I'm not going to repeat that because we've been going on now. But yeah, that one's definitely, I think, one of the clearest, because it is so hard to rationalize. It's inconsistent internally. And so, moving on. Is it hypocritical for Lorelai to tell Rory not to tell Dean about her kiss with Tristan right after they broke up, after she flings it in Max's face that she slept with Christopher when they were on a break? Or was that just her learning a lesson and passing it on to Rory and being like, take it from someone who just did that? It didn't go well.
I'm more in the camp of, she learned a very blunt lesson that she was then trying to pass on to Rory to avoid some damage control. I think the mistruthing of it is not great, because I think that now you're teaching your daughter to be deceitful to the men in her life about what is really going on, who she's interacting with. Like, again, it's just the whole concept of like, if you're done with a guy, you need to be done with a guy. It's something that Lorelai has told Rory in the past. Like, if you're done with Dean, be done with Dean. If you're done with Jess, be done with Jess. Just pick your man and who it's going to be, and be fair to everybody who's involved. But I want to give a little bit more credit to Lorelai here. I think it was more just her being like, ooh, I just had this oopsie happen to me. Let me try and like damage control this for Rory and advise her and counsel her to be a little more discreet here, because sometimes that truth coming to the forefront so bluntly can just really blow up in your face.
I would tend to agree. I think there is a fine line between like learning a lesson and it being a super valid point, and learning from your own past behavior that something might have a negative consequence and passing that on. I think that's totally legit. So I tend to agree on that one. And we talked about this too with the hyper independence episode last week, but we'll bring it up here in case people didn't listen to that episode, and also like to look at it through a slightly different lens. But I talked quite a bit about secrets and loans last week. And so my question is, was she hypocritical for going to her parents and accepting a loan for Chilton, but not to maintain the safety and livability of their home? Like, is there enough of a difference in context and outcome in that situation for it not to be hypocritical? Or was it just sort of like Lorelai being stubborn and it being used for forced drama?
Yeah, no, it definitely was hypocritical. And we've talked about this minutely in last week's episode. This is a very serious problem that you're having in your life right now. Your home is being destroyed, and it's going to be made inhospitable unless you attend to this termite issue that you're having. And Rory is still a minor at this point. It is still your duty and obligation to provide for her and keep a roof over her head. And it's contingent on you addressing this issue right now. So if you're willing to go to your parents to try and assist her with just getting her a better education that is going to allow for just betterment in her life, this also is allowing for betterment in her life, and it needs to be immediately addressed. So it's very hypocritical, I think, for Lorelai to at this point in time say, no, I can't do this. It's like, you've already asked for one thing in the past, just ask again. Your mother's going to be willing to help you. She wants to help you. You know that she'll cut you a check for this. And if you're worried about the strings that are going to come from that, address it if and when those strings pop up. But you don't even know that there are going to be strings. I mean, it's Emily Gilmore, so there's almost always strings. But case in point, you need to take this assistance here and, like we've alluded to, swallow your pride and accept this help from your mother, because this is a very serious problem right now.
Yeah. Spoilers for a future episode, but those are boundaries, Pinocchio. And yeah, that kind of, I have a few notes on this that like all kind of tie together. And it's like, why was it worth it to go to them for Rory's education, but it's not worth it to alleviate the stress that Rory is now feeling about the precarity of their financial situation with the house to save her pride in this instance? It's like, it's incomprehensible to me. And I mean, the financial abuse element has some validity to it, but also, you know, there's a deeper level of consideration when it comes to financial abuse in terms of like how much control Emily wields over Lorelai's other financial decisions and how impossible it would be for Lorelai to extricate herself from that. And I just don't think this is one of those situations. And it's just, yeah, it's a weird double standard where it's like, it's okay to put Rory through Chilton, but it's not okay for saving our house. And extending from that, you know, why is it okay for Lorelai to go to Emily and Richard to pay for Chilton, but then Lorelai fights back a little bit when Rory goes to them to pay for Yale? Why was Chilton worth it, but Yale is not? Why is she saying like, you know, no, I don't want you to do that. There are strings attached. Just once, I want you to get what you want and me to get what I want and them to get nothing. Like, it's like, if that's where she needs to get the money to continue on this path of higher education that they've been fighting for all of these years, why is she fighting it so much and trying to like resist the continuation of this sort of like quid pro bro that they've got going on with this money? It's just, again, sort of like a bizarro double standard that makes no sense, especially considering the second time with Yale, it's like Rory only implicating herself. I mean, obviously Lorelai's gonna piggyback onto it so that she can spend more time with Rory, but like, you know, Rory's entitled to make her own decisions about financing for her school, and Lorelai's just like, no, like a little kid, just sort of like emotionally reacting to this, and maybe not looking at the bigger picture of, and like, again, going back to her like independence, just being like, no, I'm going to use my money to pay for Yale and put my other dreams on the back burner and postpone my own financial stability and my own entrepreneurial goals for your sake. This self-sacrifice makes me look and feel better, whereas you accepting money from my parents is bad.
Yeah, again, just because it's all about control. You know, once Chilton money is paid off, however long that takes, we're free of any demands or obligations to Emily and Richard. But if you sign up for a Yale loan, which is even more costly than Chilton is ever going to be, you're tied to them for probably years, if not the next decade or two to come, which means that I don't have full access to you anymore because you're beholden to them. And I don't like it because codependency between mother and daughter. So just can't hack it in that regard.
Strings, Pinocchio. Yeah. Another example with Rory that's less on the financial side and more on the relationship side is in the fundamental things apply when she encourages Rory to try dating more casually. And then Rory points out that her mom is also a serial monogamist. And I think this is one of those instances where like it is a little hypocritical, but it ain't wrong. You know, it's accurate. Lorelai doesn't have to be one of the girls from Sex and the City to know that dating new people, especially when you're 18, is normal and good, because it's a way to understand yourself and your needs and your values and wants. Like learning what you're like in a relationship and what you want out of a relationship. It's a totally normal social process for young adults to go through. And part of parenting is learning from your own mistakes and helping your kids to be better. And so even if Lorelai wasn't a serial dater and, out dating people all the time over the years, and maybe she is more of a monogamous like Rory is, it doesn't mean she's not right in this moment to encourage that kind of behavior in her daughter. And it reminds me of Modern Family when Claire Dunphy is sort of misrepresenting her own past to her daughters about how many guys she dated and what kind of shenanigans she's got up to, because her philosophy is that it's like, if you pretend to be better than you are and your kids try to aim for that, at least when they fail, they'll still be better than you actually were. They won't screw up as badly as you did. It's like, it's moving the goalpost to, to have your kids be better than you. And it's kind of an interesting manipulative technique that is oddly endearing, at least when Claire Dunphy does it. I don't know.
Yeah, I concur. And I think it's good to have healthy expectations for what those dynamics are going to look like for your kids as you're encouraging them to explore what they want their relationships to look like. But also with Lorelai, with Claire, be honest about what your own experiences were like as well, so that you're modeling something that's truthful. And if it wasn't healthy, just be upfront about the mistakes that you made, so maybe they don't make the same mistakes either.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one more on Rory before we move on to another character. Was Lorelai being hypocritical when she confronted Rory about sleeping with Dean?
Nope.
Interesting. Show your work.
I mean, Rory slept with a married man. I think she's well within her rights to call that out as something that is unacceptable and detrimental behavior in this regard. We've talked about it in the past, the damage that it's going to do to Lindsay and Dean's marriage, the damage that it's just going to do to Lindsay herself, who is, even though their marriage is falling apart, undeserving of an action being taken like that between Dean and Rory in that moment. Lorelai makes it very clear, like, have they signed on the dotted line for those divorce papers? Is he out of the house? What's going on? Are they fully separated? And when Rory can't answer any of those questions because the answer is no, they're kind of still together and we just did this thing anyway, I think it's appropriate for Lorelai to call her daughter out on her ish at that moment in time, and not hypocritical to say, like, that action is not okay, because Lorelai has certainly made some mistakes within her own relationships as well, some very significant ones, but I think she was still well within her rights to call out what she was seeing and to expect her daughter to confront that mistake and own up to what she has just done and what the fallout from that is going to be.
I will say that there is an element of hypocrisy to it, because both situations, like with her and Chris and Rory and Dean, both involved infidelity, but there was a different set of material factors at play and different contexts. Chris was not yet married, and so there was a little bit of a difference there. And I think you can be a hypocrite and still be right to call someone out for their ish. And Lorelai kind of owns that. She's like, just because I made one mistake, you have to follow in my footsteps, basically. She ain't wrong about that one. It's definitely right for her to make Rory face up to it, as you said. But there's just a tinge of like, just like 2 years ago, you slept with a guy who was living with another woman and wasn't fully extricated from that relationship yet either, because, this is a show that is predicated on the apple not falling far from the tree. And this was a very specific parallel. I mean, like, what other mother-daughter duo do you know of who have both slept with people in serious relationships right as they were about to fall apart? I think there's an element of hypocrisy baked right in, and it's acknowledged in the moment. But that doesn't mean that Lorelai is wrong to call her out. So, okay, I lied. There's one more thing about Rory that I have to touch on. I don't know if it totally warrants a full discussion. But I would like to point out that in season 6, Lorelai does cut all of her ties with her daughter because she's not doing what she wants her to do. She's not living up to the expectations of like the Yale graduate and the successful journalist. And, you know, she's struggling. She's burnt out. She's having doubts and questions about her future. And her mom is not allowing space for change or growth or deviation from the path. And their reconciliation is contingent upon her going back to school and abandoning Emily and Richard. And I think that one's a little hypocritical because it's just like your parents had expectations of you that you didn't live up to. And you fought back, you stood your ground, you held your boundary, and you lived life on your own terms. And now you're not letting your daughter do that. Just because you had an expectation and a path set for her doesn't mean that it's not okay for that to change. And so to cut Rory off like that in a moment of stress and struggle is like not much better than what your parents did to you.
I would agree. That was a very hypocritical moment as well. It's not wrong for any parent to have expectations and hopes for their child, but when they fail to meet them, you need to address the how and why of what is going on. Support your child through whatever difficult moments they're facing. And Lorelai really just, turned tucked and tailed when she should have been trying to support Rory through a very just tough academic period. So yeah, the hypocrisy was definitely there as well for that.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Next on my list, Christopher. Let's not forget that the first time we ever see Chris, he's riding into town on a motorcycle, and Lorelai is drooling over this bike and is like, I want to get one. And then when Chris invites Rory to ride on it, she's like, step off or hop off. And, I get wanting to protect your kids' physical safety and having a different standard for your own risk tolerance. That doesn't make it not hypocritical.
Oh, no, it definitely is. I mean, if you're going to throw your life away, he better have a motorcycle. So it's okay for you, but not for your kid. Hello. Thank you and good night. I'm done here.
I see what you did there. And yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to the nature of Lorelai's perception of Chris and how she's often up on her high horse about being like she feels morally superior to him when she herself does some stuff that's questionable. In many ways, she still has juvenile habits that keep her in arrested development at age 16 in a similar way to him. She has the bigger stuff on lock. She's got a stable job, basic parenting responsibilities. She owns a home. And it gives an illusion that she's a lot further along in life than him, which I think shows that we prioritize these visible markers of maturity and adulthood above all else, whether we want those things for ourselves or not. We look at those as the markers without really like assessing what it means to be truly mature. We underplay the importance of other kinds of maturity and just only look at, do you have a job? Do you have a house? Do you have a car? Do you have a kid? Lorelai is messy and irresponsible, but we give her a pass because she raised a kid and did all of the like adulting behaviors. But her immaturity is what allows her to relate to her teen daughter and to have her teen daughter as her best friend. And she has the audacity to tell Chris that he's too immature.
Yeah. I mean, and we've talked about this before. It's not a bad thing, nor something that we should, critique someone too harshly on, for taking time to figure out what they want their career path to look like, what they want their life to look like. Chris and Lorelai at this point in time are still two people who are in their 30s. It's okay to still be figuring that stuff out and figure out, I still have decades of work in front of me and a career in front of me. What I've been doing up until this point has not been satisfying. I need to try and find something else that's going to allow for a better sense of happiness and more financial stability. Chris was still trying to navigate those waters. Give him time and let him try and, get back on his own 2 feet, as opposed to coming down on him because he's not where you're at. It's a very, that's now you're black and white, with two different people who are at two different points in their lives in two different junctures. You've been very lucky to get where you've been. Chris needs more time. Doesn't make him a failure or any less of a person in terms of the success that he could have. Just give him a chance.
Yeah, growing up is a process. It takes time. And it doesn't end when you get married, buy a house, or even have a kid. And Lorelai is living proof of that. Like, we see examples of her immaturity throughout. Like, I was watching Clamor and the Clangor earlier, and she's fighting with Luke because she finds out that he moved. And she's sort of like sitting on the couch, like curled up like this on the phone with Rory, like where do I go for food? How do I get food? Like, I don't want to go to Luke's. And Rory's like, I'm hanging up now because you're in your stubborn mode and I need to study. You know, like, her 19-year-old daughter is calling her out, being like, you're just being immature and I can't deal with you right now. I have other stuff to do. And I think it's perfectly emblematic of the fact that Lorelai is not nearly as mature as she tries to portray herself as, and therefore it is hypocritical and judgmental of her to look at Chris and be like, he wants things he's not ready for. I know him so well, you have no idea. He's not ready for a family. And I'm like, were you ready for a family? Just because you like did what you had to do to survive and you've like unhealthily enmeshed with this kid doesn't mean he's not as mature as you. Like, he's been able to mature in other ways. You just said different contexts. I don't know. It's just she calls him out for like not being ready for stuff, but then turns down Max, you know? And on top of that, this is the fun one that I made the connection of recently.
Oh boy.
Just a couple episodes after she turns down Chris, she goes to Luke and says, like, hey, why don't you give Rachel a chance to prove that, like, she means it this time? You know, he says, I've heard the speech, you know, I've memorized the speech. And she convinces him to take a chance and to maybe let Rachel in, to trust that this time she means what she says. And a couple of weeks ago, she was like, there's no way Chris could possibly mean what he says. Yeah. And then she goes off and gets engaged and calls Chris on her wedding night, or her bachelorette night rather. And just the whole thing is a mess where she's telling, or she's giving advice that she's not taking herself, which is the heart of hypocrisy.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting too, because at that point in time, it's not super there, but there's definitely chemistry between Luke and Lorelai. So the fact that she's saying, go just try stuff with Rachel right now, I think it's just because maybe she was just, you know, oh, I have my own stuff going on, so I'm not really going to feel bad if you have your own stuff going on. And then if mine works out, great. If yours works out, great. But if it fails, then we can just come back to one another. But like, I'm otherwise occupied right now, so I'm okay if you're otherwise occupied right now. It's also still weirdly manipulative and controlling in that regard, just to say, like, you're allowed to be otherwise occupied because I am.
Yeah. It's an interesting one with them. But I guess that brings us on to more hypocrisy with Luke. Something that always gets me about their dynamic is that she often tries to like push him to change when she herself won't change. Like in the concert interruptus episode, when she's trying to get him to paint the diner. And she says, you know, you have to take everything off the wall anyway. Now might be a good time to decide what stuff you're going to keep and what you're going to get rid of. And, you know, the fact that he's so connected to his stuff and, like, you know, he's got this nostalgia for things. Lorelai is exactly the same way. Like when Chris moves in and wants to put in a bigger TV, a better TV. And she's like, but I like my TV. You know, she encourages Luke to take steps that she herself won't take for a relationship. And yeah, I find that interesting. And it repeats itself too in Lost and Found when he needs to have more space for him and Jess to peacefully coexist. And she's like, you should definitely move into a bigger place.
Yeah, but she's unwilling to ever consider leaving her Stars Hollow house. Men can try and fit into my life here if they want to. I'm not going anywhere else. But then she'll, again, like you said, try and condone and motivate other people to change and uproot their lives to, coexist with other individuals, but will never do it herself.
Yeah. She encourages a sentimental minimalist to rent a new apartment because it's not just him anymore. And it's a problem that can't be solved with an inflatable mattress and storage bins. But she'll never expand her ambitions for a guy. She only allowed Luke to build out her room because she didn't want to move into the house that he wanted for them. And, it's like she draws the line when it touches her. She gave an inch, but will ignore the heart of that advice about letting other people in and upgrading what you need according to the circumstance. And I don't love that. And then another spot where she is hypocritical with him is, it's all right for Lorelai to date Max, her kid's teacher, but it's not okay for Luke to date Ava, a Chilton mom, because it could be awkward for Lorelai.
Where's the, oh, there it is. Found it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't have mine. But yes, red flag. Red flag. It just, again, with the controlling behavior, it's just like, I'm single, so you have to be too. And the double standard for like, it's okay for her to date someone who directly has influence over her child, but it's not okay for Luke to date someone that she has to interact with every couple of weeks at Booster Club. Just,
yeah.
I'm
exactly.
out.
And it's the tie that I alluded to before, where it's like, you can be otherwise occupied because I am right now. But if I go back to being single, then you need to go back to being single too.
Oh boy. All right. And going back to Jess, speaking of car crashes, teach me tonight when Lorelai's talking to Rory and Rory's like, yeah, if Dean calls, just tell him I'm studying. And she's like, how come I have to lie to Dean? Well, you know just as well as I do that it's not going to be okay with Dean if I'm studying with Jess. Then maybe you shouldn't be. I mean, if you feel weird enough about it that I have to lie to Dean. And so there's this back and forth that they have. And this is a precursor. And it's later that she has her own reckoning with this in season 5 when she's hanging out with Chris a bunch and not telling Luke about it. I don't think Luke would be too happy that she's hanging out with her ex and her baby daddy. And yet she lies to him about it multiple times, sometimes at the insistence of both her daughter and her best friend.
Yeah, because again, it is always so much easier to call someone out on their own faults than to admit your own. And we always talk about how Rory is holier than thou. Definitely got it from Lorelai. She just can't own up to the fact that she makes mistakes.
Yep. Oh, and then she yells at Luke at the end and is just like, why did you bring him here? None of this would have happened if you had just sent him away. He's trying to be a parent and a good guardian and to make sure that this kid is okay. Lorelai knows where Rory is and knows what her condition is. And yet she totally rips Luke a new one for being concerned about Jess's well-being instead of just Rory's. And I'm just like, I can't with you anymore, Lorelai. I can't.
That's a whole mood. I can't with Lorelai Gilmore.
Yeah. Another one, she doesn't tell him about Alex. She hides Alex and then later confronts him about not telling her that he moved in with Nicole. Is it hypocrisy or does the context matter in that Luke moving is a bigger deal than Lorelai just going on an out-of-character date?
Context doesn't matter. Like, if you want someone to be transparent with you, be transparent with them. At this point in time, like, there are no romantic obligations there. You're still just friends, so to say. But if that's what you want from that person at that point in time, give back what you expect.
Yeah. And last but not least for Luke, obviously we have April. Luke waits patiently for 5 months, 3 weeks, and 16 days for Lorelai to be ready to set a wedding date. And then she offers him an ultimatum about like, we need to elope right now.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll get more into that when we talk about her relationship with Luke and Luke's parenting obligations to April. But just had to throw it into the hypocrisy episode because, again, with the double standard where Lorelai needs something particular to feel secure in her relationship with Rory before making a big change in her personal life, in her romantic life. But Luke is not, like, she's way more impatient with Luke than he is with her.
Yeah, that would be an entire tangent. So I think we'll have to circle back on that another time.
Yeah. Moving on. Suki. 2 months, you're cha-cha-chaing. And then Lorelai goes from zero to jackass and calls her out for not dating very much when, like, Lorelai also hasn't dated very much. She kind of, is like, how would you know? You haven't been on a date in a while. I mean, seriously?
Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible friend moment. And like we've alluded to it before, and I would just hate to think it, but I almost wonder if Lorelai was coming down on Suki more because it's just, for when this show was being made, Melissa McCarthy was, considered to be a plus size actress. And so I wonder if that translated to how they wrote for her on screen, where it's like, well, Suki probably isn't dating as much because, of course, someone like Lorelai is going to, have men lining up for her, but Suki will not. And so she's coming down on her best friend for, you're probably just not attracting men because that. And it's like, it's so, like, I would not even want to be friends with somebody at that point in time if that was their reasoning or they were just alluding to that. I don't think that was what Lorelai was doing specifically, but it still just doesn't make it right to harp on your friend's single nature when that's her own choice to make if she does not want to be in a relationship when your track record is really not any better.
Yeah. Again, with that scene, I'm a little bit of two minds because I can get how it's annoying to get dating advice from someone who's not dating, like taking romantic advice from someone who is chronically single and has never been in a long-term relationship. I mean, for a long time, I was single and had never experienced a long-term relationship or cohabitation. And so it would be somewhat hypocritical for me to try to give advice to people about, like, this is the best way to have a relationship when I haven't done that myself. And I mean, I may have done that in the past, or like at least tried to provide emotional support to someone in such a situation where it's like, okay, I haven't been here before, but this is my thought process on it, trying to offer it from like that. And in this circumstance, it was Suki offering an observation about Lorelai's patterns, and Lorelai flipped it back on her unfairly in sort of like an ad hominem attack. But there is some sort of validity to saying, like, you don't actually have experience here, and so your advice is inherently hypocritical. It's offering advice you yourself are not taking. Offering advice to Lorelai about like staying in a relationship when Suki is chronically too busy to have a relationship. She's not making an effort for her, or seemingly not making an effort for her own romantic life. And it takes Lorelai's criticism, as harsh as it was, for her to ask out Jackson. And so it at least had a benefit in that it sort of woke Suki up out of what seemed like maybe a bit of a rut for her. And so it's like, I kind of see where Lorelai was coming from there. I think they were both sort of spitting truth, but it was an uncomfortable truth. And you need to be a little more delicate when bringing up the hypocrisy in, like, why should I take advice from someone who hasn't, or like who isn't in this position and has never been in this position? So I have a little bit of like a sympathetic divide there, but there might be some other Suki examples. I just don't have them written down here. I feel like there have to be way more examples of stuff that like are even subtler that I didn't write down, but we do have a few more characters to wrap this out. A big one that I've noticed and have probably mentioned before is Mrs. Kim. And, you know, she harps on about the mom card and having to respect the fact that Mrs. Kim gets to make the decisions for Lane and how Lane conducts herself. She gets to set the expectations and standards for her own child. And yet Lorelai allows Hep Alien to use her garage to practice. She facilitates Lane's relationship with Dave behind Mrs. Kim's back, even though she yelled at Rory for Rory helping facilitate the double date with Todd. She kind of ruins Mrs. Kim's wedding dress. I mean, she does a nice job with the alterations, but she fundamentally changes the dress in a way that Mrs. Kim didn't ask for. You know, obviously Mrs. Kim wanted the dress to fit Lane's proportions, but I bet she wasn't expecting Lorelai to make so many changes to a piece of clothing that's pretty sentimental to most people. She would feed Lane pizza and other nutritionless foods. She would give Lane a place to hang out and listen to the music her mom wouldn't let her listen to. You know, she's in Rory's room before school skanking to Rancid. Like, you know, just so many things where she let Lane behave contrary to her mother's wishes for her, despite saying, I can't break the mom code, Rory.
Yeah, and it is hypocritical, all of that combined, but also because Lorelai has moments with Mrs. Kim of just, you know, saying, like, you need to trust Lane. She's a really great kid. You've raised an excellent daughter. You know, maybe ease up a little bit, you know, and let her make some of her own choices and trust that those choices are going to be good ones, and just have faith in the child that you have raised. But then when she's not in your presence, I'm just going to go behind your back and do all of the things that I know you don't want her to do anyway, which, you know, now obviously you're enabling that distrust to come to, you know, the immediate forefront. I just,
yeah,
don't preach, you know, from one mother to another that that you should trust your kid, but then do everything that you don't want that child doing at the bequest of her mother behind her back anyway.
Yeah. That one's, I think, one of the most obvious cases. Some more on Jess. She calls him out for shit that she was probably doing as a teen. Drinking, being snotty and irreverent. And yet she tries to come in like a guru, being like, I know what it was like, when no, you didn't. Your parents were present, if neglectful in their own way. But like, you grew up with every privilege, and this kid has been like living in financially insecure and neglectful and dangerous situations that you couldn't even imagine. Like, you had so many legs up in life that he did not have to this point. And I know that you think Luke is trying to offer him that, and that you're trying to help by butting in where you don't belong. But yeah, it's a bad look to be like, look, I've been there. I've done that. No, you haven't.
Yeah, agreed. She had no context for what Jess was going through. He had a very troubled and traumatic childhood, absent parents. And, you know, Lorelai did to an extent, but not in the same way. So it's just wrong for her to equate her situations to Jess's at that point in time.
Yeah. And then more on Logan as well. She gets on him about the sewing box, or like forms an opinion about him based on that. When just a few episodes earlier, she suggested gluing all of Emily's furniture to the ceiling, but upside down. And then she messed with the seating chart and got the wedding planner fired. She like goes on a drunken tirade against rich people just doing whatever they want. And then she got someone fired. But then a couple episodes later, she's like scolding Logan, like, give me the box. Like,
yeah.
Right to the bay.
It's fine.
Yeah. And then obviously kind of going back to the whole like financial privilege side of things in But I'm a Gilmore, you know, Rory plays the card of, but I'm a Gilmore, don't they know that? And Lorelai, as we've been mentioning, has these feelings against this privilege and this whole like family name legacy crap. And yet I didn't even really clock this until recently when I was putting together this script. And Lorelai does the exact same thing. She's like, don't they know you're a Gilmore? So like she defaults to that as well. And she plays that card being like, how could they possibly say these things about you and feel this way about you when, you know, you have all the privileges that they do, acknowledging that, like, what are they talking about? And so she's feeding into that conception of like, we're better than other people because we're Gilmores.
Yeah. It's all about the name. Huntsberger name, Gilmore name. Be good enough for it, or just don't come anywhere near the family.
Yeah. And I've got one last major example that I want to throw out there just before some closing remarks. Lorelai is a hypocrite for not going to therapy.
She is indeed. 1,000%. That's just, you know, I'd lay money on that wager all day. She needs it, whether it's going to be with her mother or whether it's going to be on her own. You've got a lot of baggage that you need to unpack, that you need assistance with.
Yeah. She suggests it in Back in the Saddle again when Richard's having a hard time adjusting to retirement. And she suggests it to her mom in the revival to deal with her grief, but she never considers it for herself to deal with her own traumas and her own childhood wounds. The only time she gets anywhere close to it before the revival is that conversation she has with Linny about her relationships. And, you know, obviously my question is, you know, was this because of a lack of access? Was it not part of her Benny's package at work? Was it too expensive for her? Or does she just really not think that she needs it or that it's beneficial to her because, like, she can handle it. She can do it all on her own.
I would be inclined to think that it was just the latter, that she doesn't feel like she's in need of therapy, that it's just going to be reflective of her in a very negative way. It's going to, you know, have people like Suki and Michelle, you know, looking down on her, her own daughter looking down on her, you know, maybe even Emily and Richard's, you know, family, friends, upper class society looking down on her, but also, you know, looking down on the concept of therapy and anyone who is, you know, pursuing that. So I just think she was trying to mitigate that and tell herself, I'm not that bad. I'm not in need of that. And even if I innately know that's what I probably should do, I'm not going to, because it's just going to have a very consequential and negative impact on how people see me.
Yeah, I think she took the attitude of, I can take care of myself. And that was the bottom line for her. All right, that brings me to my last, like, closing thoughts. I'm sure there are a number of examples we missed. If you can think of any more, drop them in the comments. Maybe someday we'll have to do a part 2. And just like, because I feel like there's a lot. But at the end of the day, what is the bottom line about Lorelai's hypocrisy? Should we care? Why call it out? Does it destroy her credibility as a parent and a quote unquote morally superior character? You know, we as the audience know she's flawed, but she's often up on her high horse. Does it undermine that? Does it make her less likable? And, you know, I have my own thoughts, but what do you think?
I think it's definitely important that we call her out on it. You know, we always need to be bettering ourselves as individuals. It needs to start with us. You know, it's good to recognize in, again, family members, friends, romantic partnerships, you know, when people are in need of assistance and help, but we also need to be mindful of the help that we might need and the reflection that we need to do ourselves. Like, I just think of Luke with the self-help tapes. Like, the man was working on bettering himself before he could try and be a better partner to somebody else. That's kind of really, I think, a similar inspiration of what we need to be drawing from. Focus on how you can make yourself better as an individual, so then you can in turn be a better support network to the people around you. So I think it's absolutely prevalent and important that we're calling out Lorelai on all of the times when she was hypocritical, couldn't recognize her own flaws, things that she needed to work on within herself, but that she was so quick to point fingers at everybody else. So I think it's really good to highlight all of those examples because we need to not do what she did.
Yeah, I mean, we're all flawed, and, you know, none of us is perfect. But if we kind of give up on progress and betterment, then what's the point of morals? What's the point of trying to be a better person? Society would just fall apart if we all gave up because we knew that we couldn't beat the hypocrisy. I would also just really like to point out that the presence of hypocrisy doesn't undermine the validity of the points made by the hypocrite. In fact, sometimes it can strengthen the argument. It's like, look what happened to me. I'm telling you this because I know from experience. And, sometimes do as I say, not as I do can be important to be like, please, please, please learn from my mistakes. But yeah, I think there's a human nature component of wanting to call it out in people. It's sort of an interesting ad hominem attack. We react emotionally to the character of the speaker rather than contending with the validity or strength of their position, because it's easier than gathering all the evidence we would need to judge that for ourselves. And it's easier to take that sort of easy way out and to simplify things for ourselves by just ignoring the reality. But we shouldn't do that. We should take a step back and think about it, and judge the advice or the criticism on the merit of the criticism and not based on the attitudes or behaviors of the speaker. Just because she's a hypocrite doesn't make what she's saying false or wrong. It doesn't mean she's not giving good advice. It's not okay necessarily for her to judge others, but I think it is okay for her to call out their bad behavior. I also think that hypocrisy often hurts the hypocrite more often than it hurts the person that they're trying to give advice to, because I think there's a cognitive dissonance element for them that they have to contend with. And that can be uncomfortable as well, to contend with your own failures. But, at the end of the day, we need to focus on the arguments. We need to assess the strength of their positions, and not give into those emotional reflexes, because it's just like a thought-stopping pattern. We need to judge for ourselves the information and what applies to us, instead of just being like, you're a terrible person and I'm not listening to anything you say because you're a hypocrite. So I think that while Lorelai does kind of fit into that a little bit, that doesn't make her a bad person. And it doesn't make what she's saying invalid. And yeah, that's my kind of last thoughts on the hypocrisy stuff. But that, for now, at least, wraps up our discussion about Lorelai's kind of key character concepts. Of course, we reserve the right to have more deep dive episodes on her in the future, because she's a really interesting character to look at. And just as sort of a wrap up to the entire mini series that we've done here, I just want to point out that every time I listen to Antihero by Taylor Swift, I think of Lorelai. I have this thing where I get older, but just never wiser. I'll stare directly at the sun, but never in the mirror. It must be exhausting always rooting for the anti-hero. And I don't think Lorelai is anti-heroic necessarily, but there's a lot in this song that sort of reminds me of her. Did you hear my covert narcissism I disguise as altruism? I don't think she's a covert narcissist necessarily, because I think she does have empathy. But I think there is an element to the disguised altruism that kind of goes back to the hypocrisy. Yeah, it's just, I don't think she's an anti-hero, but is she the problem?
Yes and no. Again, it stems from trauma and a poor childhood and just diminishing upbringing. That's not her fault. But where the fault lies is that she doesn't put in the adequate work to course correct and allow for that betterment. And so that's where it's a yes and no.
I totally agree. She has her problems. She creates some unnecessary ones by being dramatic and stubborn and recalcitrant. But I think the biggest problem that she has is not being self-reflective. Again, that sort of I'll stare directly into the sun, but never in the mirror. That, to me, is one of Lorelai's key flaws. And in order to like really truly be the best version of herself, that is what she needs to focus on.
Yeah, I also need to see Lorelai Gilmore wearing that on a t-shirt now because it's just so emblematic of that problem.
A lot going on right now. Or a lot going on at the moment. Yeah. A lot of people say that she and Taylor Swift are basically the same person, and I think Antihero just really cements that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, we said an hour, and it's now 1:45. Classic us. So quick wrap up. If you haven't already, please hit the like, subscribe, check the links in the description. There's like fun stuff down there, links to our social media, and also links to find out about the Fan Fest happening in Connecticut in October. Why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, it will be happening October 18th through 20th in Guilford, Connecticut. A few cast members have already been announced. More will be announced in the coming weeks as it gets closer to this event. So you have a wonderful opportunity to meet them. But also this fandom is one of the most enveloping and warm and loving fandoms that I think I have ever encountered. Whether you're coming with a partner, a friend, whether you're traveling alone, like you are going to find friends there and people who are just so warm and welcoming, while embracing this show that we have all come to know and love. So please go buy a ticket to this event. It's very likely that it will sell out. There are probably a limited number of tickets left already. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask us. But if you're a Gigi fan, this is absolutely the event for you and something that you will not regret attending or being a part of.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we're very excited to go back. But in the meanwhile, join us next week for more Lorelai talk. But this time, we're going to start a 3-part series. It was going to be a 2-part series, then it turned into a 3-part series about the entire relationship of Lorelai and Christopher. So part 1, we're going to be talking sort of like season 1. Yeah, I think we end Christopher Returns. I think we spend the whole first episode talking about that. We recorded some stuff out of order, so that's already been done. But yeah, it's it's spicy and it's good. Definitely stick around for the next couple of weeks, and then after that, we're gonna be talking about Chris as a dad. So like a lot of Lorelai, Chris, Rory dynamics coming up in the near future. Very deep dives. So
we have spicy takes, but we want yours too. So please come back and join us for that. In the meantime, again, any support that you can show us, we're always so grateful for. If you want to share any of our content with any other GG lovers, we just love to hear your thoughts as well. So
yeah. And on that note, we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Ciao.
Bye.